Good morning, everyone. My name is Jerry Dixon, and I manage the alliances here at ProShip. I'm very excited to join you for the third annual Pros Who Know event. Speaking of the number three, I am with three of the most eclectic and intelligent and insightful people in the logistics industry this morning. And we're going to talk more about diversifying your alternative carriers and why that's so important. So with me today is Vince D'Amato from Parcel, Peter Sheldon from X Delivery, and Frank Parisi from ShipX. Vince, if you'll kick us off, please introduce yourself and tell us a little more about your company.
Sure, will do. Thank you very much, Jerry. Excited to be on. Good morning, everyone. Vin D'Amato here, U.S. Head of Sales with Parcel. Parcel is actually a global e-commerce logistics company with operations in Asia, Europe, and then in North America. Specifically here in the U.S., we've got today, as it stands today, 7 hubs here in the continental U.S., and we've got a operation in Canada that we just recently opened, and one in Mexico as well. And I'd like to turn it over here to Peter.
Hey, thanks, Vin. Good morning, everyone. Peter Sheldon, SVP of Strategy and Growth at X Delivery. X Delivery is an expedited parcel carrier here in the United States. We serve the whole country using an accelerated air model, working primarily with larger enterprise retail accounts, specifically in the fashion and apparel and space. So I'll pass over to Frank.
Well, thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. Frank Parisi, VP of Sales here at ShipX. And at ShipX, working diligently with my team to build out our brand as a tech-enabled, full-service transportation solution provider. Whether shippers' need exists in the bulk, first or middle mile space, or full door-to-consumer, final mile parcel delivery option, ShipX can definitely craft a solution to meet most any shipper's needs, and all the while keeping our green initiatives top of mind. Like Peter and Vin, I'm excited to be here with everyone today as I've looked back, and I think I've been in this transportation and logistics space for some 32 years now, 28, which have been in the parcel carrier operations and sales side of it. And I look forward to sharing my thoughts with you all and look forward to learning from others on the call as well. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Before we begin, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question, please remember there are no call-in numbers. You must listen via the device speakers, and you will receive a recording post-webinar if you'd like. And we encourage you to submit questions for experts to answer using the tools in the GoToWebinar, and handouts will be available for download later. Today, we're going to cover a few items, mainly the current parcel landscape, why alternative carriers are so important, why you should diversify your carrier portfolio, the timing and preparation needed, and then we're going to have a little bit of takeaways, a little bit of Q&A at the end. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about the big picture, gentlemen. The rise of e-commerce, it was quite an amazing rise over the past few years, gave way and opened the market to alternative carriers. So Ben, if you could start us off, can you tell us a little bit about what was going on during the pre-pandemic and how the alternative carrier mix became so important?
Sure. Well, I think as most or all of us on this call know, pre-pandemic was a bit of a different landscape, right? I mean, we had, fewer options in terms of, retailers, sellers, merchants, really the shipper side, right? Fewer options, probably less of an appetite to spread volume out amongst carriers. Most often I would imagine probably the shipper, the retailer was negotiating with one, maybe two, possibly typically three at the most, different providers. And alternative carriers, I mean, certainly there were, I would say, limited viable players pre-pandemic, less overall coverage, and probably less overall capabilities, and certainly less connectivity among and between providers. I would say, is probably a good way to summarize pre-pandemic state, from the carrier side.
Did you see or know immediately during the pandemic how much growth you guys were going to see?
You know, we started back in 2014 with operations really specifically designed to service cross-border e-commerce coming out of the Asia market. And then we, quickly launched a significant operation in Europe, and then more recently back in 2018 in North America. And so we're kind of purpose built for e-commerce. So from our side, I think, probably all of us, the pandemic created, so much headwind, but then ultimately it kind of quickly pivoted, and it was a tailwind, for us. And we were and still continue to make significant investments in our operation here in our network, to bring us to the present modern day state that we're in now. But I think every carrier is a bit different. I think, most of the alternative carriers, and you could certainly include a lot of the regional last mile carriers, maybe who were even purpose built for more commercial B2B type deliveries. I think we're able to be a little bit more nimble, agile, and pivot quickly into, kind of this massive boom of direct to consumer, residential, whatever you want to call it, e-commerce type delivery. So I think the landscape now is just so much more in favor of the retailer, the shipper, the merchant, where there's just so many more options and viable options now. And so I think the pendulum has definitely swung. And I think, really we can talk more, I know, about strategy and, diversifying and different ways to approach this. But yeah, I would say that's kind of where we're at now. There's a lot more competition, which is great. It's really great for all of us, certainly great for, for the shipper side. And I think, to some degree, the playing field has been a bit leveled. And so it's just an exciting time to be in the business. Yeah.
It is. It is. So let's talk a little bit more about, now that we're post-pandemic, Peter, Sheldon, what kind of parcel shipping challenges do you see currently?
Yeah, I think the landscape's changed a little bit from where we were, a year ago in 21. In 21, there was definitely anxiety about capacity, and certainly the legacy sort of big two, big three were being, quite restrictive in terms of putting capacity caps on the shippers, on the retailers, and I think that was creating a little bit of a sort of forced hand type issue for many of those retailers to, in some respects, very last minute, look for alternatives, to go and evaluate alternative carriers to sort of fill the gaps and make sure that they had enough capacity to fulfill all their orders over the holidays. I think this year is a little different. I think the dust has settled. There may be some doom and gloom and some cloud storms that are forming around recessionary fears and just how what will the holidays look like. But if we look, I think e-commerce is destined to do well. There may be a slowdown in overall retail, but if you look at forecasts that just came out from Deloitte, they're forecasting 12 to 14% year-over-year growth for e-commerce here in the US. So we're going to continue to see, I think, elevated parcel volumes. I just think that because of the diversity, as Vince was explaining, there's a lot of new carriers, last mile options in the market. I think we're better equipped, certainly not to have capacity issues this year. But I think the retailers, the shippers, they're very much sort of woken up to the fact that a single source strategy and relying on one vendor maybe isn't the best fit. And so I think what we're seeing is the retailers start to realize that yes, there are a lot of alternative options, but that it's actually there's no one size fits all. There are solutions and vendors out there who are really good at doing, same day delivery from stores. There are vendors like ourselves who are really focused on a sort of 2 to 3 day expedited option. There's a lot of, vendors that are, focused on ground, deferred ground, big and bulky versus, specialized, sort of wine deliveries. And so, food delivery, grocery, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's very much the retailers are starting to realize that they can really, work with multiple providers and multiple alternative carriers to find the best solution for the different parts of their business. And so, this sort of mentality of, well, we'll do a sort of global MSA with one carrier who'll do our store shipments, we'll do our residential shipments, that'll do everything. I think that mentality is really going away, and they're realizing that there's they can create a better consumer experience by working with carriers that are really sort of focused on specific areas and specific needs in their business.
And the shippers have more power now than they have ever had before, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the shippers very much have sort of, woken up to the fact that, they're not locked into their contract, that they can, spread that volume, around amongst, multiple alternative carriers, and that, there may have been some sort of, fear around, well, I'll lose my discounts and so forth. But I think that's, really going away very much. As you say, the power is in the hands of the shipper and the retailer. They're learning to work with their procurement organizations, that, working with multiple carriers is actually a great strategy. It's giving them, and I think they're also sort of realizing that this isn't just like a negotiating tool to try and get, their incumbent or to better negotiate rates with their incumbent. They're realizing that no, this is an overall strategy, that they need to be diversified. They need to not be dependent on one platform, and more so that again, as I said, for specific types of delivery, that they can see sort of better performance and a better fit by working with perhaps more niche solutions that are tailored on a specific use case.
We're going to do a poll question now, so we're going to flip on over. Are you exclusive to one or more of the following: UPS, FedEx, DHL, or USPS? And right now, the collected responses, 85% say no, 15% say yes. Does that sound about right to you, gentlemen? Most of the people are responding that they are not exclusive.
Yeah, it's good. It's encouraging for sure.
Yeah, I think that very much reflects where we are in 2022. I suspect a year or 2 years ago, it might have been more 50-50, but it's great to see that transition and shift.
All right, great. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about diversification. And Frank, I would like for you to in this section, because you dropped a word with me a few weeks ago and I haven't forgotten it. And you said it's not just about diversifying, it's about augmentation. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, for sure, Jerry. And when you hear the two words, you almost think they're almost synonymous, really, right? Because if you do diversify, you are augmenting your carrier ecosystem. But I prefer to, mention the word augmenting carrier base, because shippers will always have a need for a primary carrier that has a multitude of service offerings that covers maybe more of the spectrum than not. And then to augment that carrier base with a partner or partners that have, cutting edge technology, that have good services to offer, or niche plays in the market, are always going to be essential to performing business in the e-commerce space, because the word alternative means options, right? And I think in order to have options to, address your strategic initiatives, whether it be final mile delivery from store, whether it be addressing larger and bulkier items, you're always going to have a need for options. And I think that's been clearly evident during the pandemic, post-pandemic, and even a little bit prior to, for sure. So, to say that, diversification, augmentation, synonymous, it's like saying that to augment the carrier basis, to diversify, is to try to create shade agent and, have that leverage with the big nationals as well. So be able to say, hey, look, the alternatives are coming to us with that technology, with these really cutting edge, solutions that could be well servicing in the industry, and not only my landscape, but others, is a need. It's definitely out there. And I think it's very important that carriers realize that.
Right. Peter, what do you think? What makes an alternative carrier a good fit for a customer?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to what we're seeing with a lot of our customers is that they're using, I think, sort of coming out of the pandemic, they're really looking strategically about what is their shipping strategy for the next, year, 2 years, 3 years. It certainly as it relates to e-commerce. And I think, what we're seeing is everyone's waking up to the fact that they're getting further behind in terms of being able to compete with Amazon. And what I mean by that is that free shipping has very much become, ubiquitous. I can't think of a single online retailer that's not offering some form of free shipping, today. And that's been hugely successful, obviously, from a digital marketing and sort of, demand gen lead conversion perspective. But meanwhile, Amazon has been racing ahead, ubiquitous 2-day delivery across the country. Andy Jassy announcing in the shareholder letter that they're really focused on moving that to a 1-day service across the country. Whereas most of the retailers that, if we think about sort of the top 1,000 retailers in the US, their free shipping is still a sort of, in many cases, 5 days or worse, 6, 7, 8 day business day service. And consumers are, I would say, not tolerant of that anymore. They're used to a 2-day service from Amazon. They are certainly looking, when there's a product, they're going to Amazon to see if they can get it faster. They know it'll be the same price on Amazon. They know shipping will be free, but they know that if it's available on Amazon, they'll get it a whole lot quicker. And so I think what we're seeing is, a real focus on how do we ship faster? How do we get those products into the consumer's hands in 2 to 3 business days from them clicking the order button on the site? And this has ramifications throughout our industry. It's putting pressure on the 3PLs to process orders faster because they have to compete with the service from Amazon, and it's forcing the retailers to look at alternative carriers to say, listen, can we get things faster by using a regional in the areas where our distribution center is? Should we be opening additional distribution centers? Should we be looking for alternative carriers like the firm I work for, X Delivery, that can get things across the country in 2 to 3 days, and trying to sort of do all this, but also conscious that we're going into a recessionary period and that there isn't necessarily budget to increase the spend on free shipping, or that marketing don't have an infinite pot of gold to subsidize free shipping. So there is this balance between everyone trying to catch up with Amazon, but do so in sort of a fiscally responsible way. And it is really, I think, it is the issue that the whole industry faces. But carrier diversification is going to be front and center of achieving those goals. We see a lot of RFPs coming in from prospective shippers, and very much in sort of that intro, setting the strategy of what they're trying to do. The RFP is very clear. We have a near to medium term goal to make all of our shipments 2-day so that we can compete with Amazon. And then it's sort of like, well, how are we going to do this? What are the different strategies? How many, are we going to leverage our store network and do same-day deliveries from stores? Are we going to work with regionals, and so on and so forth?
Okay. It's very important for everyone to also be tech enabled and be innovative, and they also need to lean on their community, right, Ben?
Oh, for sure. I think when you speak about being tech enabled, I think today's alternative carriers are much more advanced in terms of connectivity, or I should say, capabilities to become integrated into, I guess is a good way to put it. And I think that we'll talk more about, kind of this process maybe in a slide or two. But yeah, I think just to go back and echo kind of one of Peter's sentiments, I think a big part of understanding, what the options are for the shipper is to invest the time to learn, about the landscape and know who's out there, and and really try to find that ideal intersection of what your need or gap, or the area that you're trying to improve on, and align that to the strength, the core capabilities, if you will, of the alternative carrier. And I think where you find those intersections is where you want to try to capitalize on. So yeah, I think we're starting to see, and I think the poll reflected that, we're starting to see a lot more, kind of RFPs that are really including a wide range of alternative carriers now. And I think there's just a lot more receptiveness to, to breaking, like I said earlier, just to kind of breaking off bits and pieces, or strategically selecting carriers based on where they can, add significant value, whether it's, reduction of cost or improvement of service, or helping you ultimately to improve your customers' experience. I mean, that's kind of the end game. So, reducing some risk. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think we're starting to see some of these GRIs starting to roll around now, but there's a lot of uncertainty going into the future as far as, how much more are costs going to increase. So that's I think this strategy is long-term. It's a long game.
Right. Okay, we're going to ask another poll question. We are asking the listeners if they are currently working with alternative carriers. And the responses collected so far are 73% yes, and 20% no, and 7% no, but plan to in the next 6 to 12 months. So Speaking of plan to, Frank, timing and preparation is extremely important, right?
Absolutely, Jerry, right? There's never seems to be enough time in a day to address what needs to be addressed for any of us, certainly. But at the same time, I think we all can agree, whether you're on the shipper side or a carrier side, that it's always best to be proactive in an approach as much as possible. I think one lesson from the pandemic was the reactive state of it all. Everyone was, trying to figure out best ways to relieve capacity constraints or deal with the influx of business or whatever the case may be, and do it diligently and accurately. But at the same time, now that dust has settled a little bit, it's always best to think ahead strategically, a couple of years, understand who's out there, because look on the screen, there are a multitude now of providers, alternative providers that offer unique services. And whether you have a specialized need or whether you have maybe more of a comprehensive need and a little bit more of a developed need, short term and into the long term for solutioning, understand who's out there. And what I hear often from shippers sometimes is like, I don't have the resources to do that. Well, as part of that learning community on the slide here or previously, it's like, there are people out there that can help and use the regionals, because many of us have much industry experience. We understand what goes on, and we have these new technologies available that will help streamline operational efficiencies, et cetera. So make use of it and be proactive about it in the outreach.
Right. Well, let's talk about the value points of these alternative carriers some more. Frank, if you could continue, it's important to know who's out there, right? Know what the landscape is.
Right. Yeah, again, there's alternatives, right? There's options now available. And yeah, looking at the slide, pre-pandemic, this would have been, a few to Vince's point earlier. But now fast forward to today, you see there are a multitude of alternatives out there that provide, again, specialized services. So if you have a need for same day, if you have a need for expedited, as Peter mentioned, there are options there that need to be vetted, that need to be understood, need to be, put through the paces, if you will, as a litmus test for the shipper, for sure. But at the end of the day, what I think we have seen is that these carriers and others and these alternative providers have proven the test of time, for sure, especially during the pandemic and coming out of it, that there are viable solutions, viable options available to augment or diversify your carrier ecosystem or your alternative provider ecosystem, for sure.
And Peter, capacity and performance, those are important too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, when we talk to specifically, the transportation logistics, operations teams, there's a little bit of sort of that old, hey, I won't get fired by choosing IBM, and it's the same, and I won't get fired by, continuing to work with UPS and FedEx and the Postal Service. And so I think there is sort of anxiety around working with alternative carriers, like, are they proven, what are their time in transits, what is their performance, what is their reputation, and so on and so forth. But again, the landscape is moving very, very fast. And I think, if anything, we're almost sort of pivoted that old saying on its head. And it's like, if you're, only working with one provider, then yes, you might get fired. So, but definitely, I mean, I think, the interesting thing with all of these alternative carriers is many of them, ourselves included, really are young companies. We were formed in sort of either, just pre-pandemic or in the early days of the pandemic. And, we've had to learn how to compete with the big guys. We've had to make sure that, we scaled through, the fastest growth in the history of e-commerce, and we'll probably never see anything sort of like that again in terms of that scale and growth. And so, but certainly, if you're evaluating these type of vendors, then yes, you want to make sure, you obviously want to talk to references, you want to talk to other clients that are using them. You're going to want to look very closely at, their sort of operational model. Can they be more flexible about when they show up for, for pickups at your dock? What is their time in transit to all the different lanes and zip codes that you need to serve? What are their service guarantees? I think you'll find that with most of these alternative carriers, they're in many ways a lot easier to do business with than the incumbents. Certainly from a legal contractual perspective, you've probably got a lot more room for negotiation around things like dim factors, discounts and so forth. They can be a lot more flexible to tailor a solution that's a really good fit, both contractually on sort of, on the pricing side, the service that you need. I think a lot of the alternatives will be much more will create a much more white glove service for what you need versus sort of the here's your contract from from FedEx or UPS and no, you can't redline it and sort of take it or leave it type of thing. So from that perspective, I think there's a much more strategic partnership that you can build with a lot of these last mile carriers where they can really be very strategic partners for you and helping you achieve your shipping goals, as opposed to, again, not sort of, focusing on any one of the incumbents. I think they all have this problem, but, it's very much a sort of quite a, I'd say, sort of there's a lot of friction in the relationship. There are a lot of challenges, and we're certainly seeing from sort of the procurement and the contracting side, again, retailers looking to alternative carriers because of some of the clauses they have in their contracts, things that they're just not happy about the relationship with their with their incumbent providers.
Okay. And stability and coverage are extremely important.
Yeah, no, they are.
Why?
And
Why?
yeah, I mean, obviously, stability, a lot of the vendors on this slide are, venture capital backed. So, as always, when working with a new vendor, you're going to want to do your diligence around, the viability of the firm. But, so far, this market's been very resilient. I'm sure we'll see consolidation as we, as we go down the road. We've already started to see that, obviously, with the merger of OnTrack and Lasership, and there will undoubtedly be further consolidation in this market, but that's a good thing. It creates scale, it creates, it'll create vendors that are better positioned to compete with the big three, the big four, and then so from a viability perspective, I think there's really not sort of too much to worry about. And then from a sort of regionality, yeah, some of the vendors on the slides there have more of a nationwide service. Some of them are quite boutique and serving certain regions. So certainly a lot of it will come down to where your distribution centers are. And what we see a lot of is a big migration to regional carriers that can do those sort of that can serve the radius of where your distribution center is. So we see a lot of clients that if their distribution centers in New Jersey, they'll work with regionals that can serve some or all of the East Coast, but typically still work with their kind of incumbent vendors for the rest of the country and the West Coast.
Okay. Well, we'll drop another poll question in, and this question is: which reasons have you considered or currently working with alternative carriers, or are currently working with alternative carriers? Risk mitigation against capacity, rate increases, labor constraints, etc. Cost savings, faster delivery times, or attentiveness. So far, risk mitigation is the winner at 56%, cost savings at 22%, faster delivery times at 17%, and 6% attentiveness. I would think the risk mitigation would be the main reason, right?
For sure.
For sure. I mean, obviously, with where we are with FedEx just announcing their 6.9% GRI for next year, I'm sure UPS will follow suit. A lot of concern around the inflationary issues, and then there's obviously well documented a lot of sort of the potential forthcoming labor issues as well. So certainly, I would say a lot of anxiety about what the next sort of 6 to 12 months looks like, and if you are exclusive or dependent to one of the big two.
Okay. Timing and preparation. What do shippers need to do, even though they still are getting used to having a little more power, getting used to the craziness that is e-commerce right now? There still is time to prepare. Are each of you taking on new customers right now, then?
Yeah, we still are. I mean, I would say just kind of broadly to answer the question though, and I think Frank alluded to this a little bit earlier. Obviously, we saw at the kind of the outset of the pandemic where there was this mad scramble, right? And I think now most, most of us, and I would say from the shipper side and the carrier side, have a better window, and we've been able to kind of learn from the pitfalls of the mad scramble. And I would say that, lead time, your operation, your technical capabilities better than we would. But obviously, what we see is, at least I would say 2 to 3 months, generally speaking, from, kind of the start of any material discussion to onboarding. But it can take 6 months, and it's better to be safe and allow more time. There's typically, the commercial aspect is the negotiation is what it is. I think the bigger concerns, the bigger constraints, the bigger delays are typically operational and technical, around integration. So yeah, just understand, what your, kind of internal constraints or roadblocks might be. Obviously, it sounds like, and it's great to see how many of the attendees here are already using alternative carriers, 85% or whatever the poll showed there. So I think you have a little bit of kind of some experience that you can lean on to say, well, it took me 6 months to implement, these 2 carriers last year, or whatever the case may be. But I think the continuous process on here is spot on. We're basically in peak, or pretty much, peak is here within the next several weeks to a month. So probably very difficult to do too much now. I don't think we're expecting, a whole lot more new customer activity. But much unlike years past, this nowadays it's still common to be discussing next year plans with retailers, shippers, etc. Where typically pre-pandemic it would have been sort of lockdown for peak. There wouldn't be these types of discussions. And I think there's more receptiveness to having ongoing conversations and looking at kind of who's out there and trying to stay ahead of the game. And I think there's been this learning curve, and I think we're seeing it play out, that there's just a lot more preparedness going on right now about looking at
Right.
Bringing new carriers on.
And the shippers need to be constantly evaluating, reevaluating, assessing, reassessing, and making sure that they're ahead of those operational headwinds, right, Frank? Like the IT, the warehouse, the operations, all of those types of things.
If we learned anything over the years, Jared, to your point, there's always going to be operational headwinds, and there's always going to be constraints in the marketplace, whether it be labor shortages, fuel costs. Throw in a pandemic, by the way, and fast forward to today, where now we hear some labor unrest and saber rattling, if you will, with some upcoming negotiations with workers, et cetera. So the old mantra, always be prepared, sticks top of mind for all of us, right? Even as alternative providers, we have to be walking maybe or one step ahead of what we think is going to be the next trend or the next operational concern, so we can maybe hopefully proactively bring it to the table with our partners, help try to address it, help try to mitigate that risk that we mentioned earlier, just to stay, again, one step ahead of that curve. I know it's difficult to do, and if we all had crystal balls, we probably wouldn't be on this call today for sure, but to do the best that we can to ensure that we have a very viable and very well-run operationally well-run ecosystem would benefit everyone.
That's right. and even with the external stakeholders and the mutual investments that are made.
Yeah, for sure. And if, if a shipper doesn't have the resources, as we talked about, maybe time, personnel, even the funds to do those types of research and to stay ahead of those analytics or absorb the analytics and digest them, there are external stakeholders like alternative providers that, we can do some consultative work as well, but there also are specialized providers in the realm that help with contract negotiations, that help with deciphering those rate increases and what the true impact is going to be to the bottom line, if you will. So it's always good to keep an open mind, to keep, an open door policy, if you will, to welcome, these alternatives and listen and understand what they can provide. And, ultimately the ROI will be there once it's been vetted and once it's been understood. So, again, it behooves a shipper, it behooves a carrier to stay in constant contact and to work through those issues that may arise.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I'd like to give each of you about 30 seconds to give our listeners your final takeaway, and then we'll do some Q&A. So Vin, let's start with you first. What's your final takeaways from this session today?
Yeah, my main takeaway, as I said it earlier, is that this is I look at this kind of like preventative maintenance on a vehicle, where if you take care of the maintenance along the way, it prevents significant costs and or disruption down the line. And I still look at this in the sense of, it's not necessarily even like a 1-year plan. This really should be a 3 to 5 year plan, not necessarily the specific alternative carrier, but just how you're going to manage a multi-carrier matrix, if you will. And so think about it long term. Start the process early. Build the relationships that you need to have with the alternative carriers. And it's just a kind of a constant process of learning and understanding the landscape of the alternative carriers that are out there, what the capabilities are, what their strengths are, how they can best suit your needs. I know we've got some questions that are coming in, and happy to talk about that, and I can tie this answer into some of these questions. But that's my main takeaway, is this to me, I really feel is a long-term strategy.
Peter?
Yeah, so I'm going to defer to the last poll here. 45% saying risk mitigation, 27% cost savings, 24% faster delivery times. I think historically, transportation, logistics, warehouse operations, they've looked at sort of alternative carriers through the lens of, can we save costs? Can we rate shock? Can we shave? Are there certain lanes where we can deliver on our cost saving goals? But I think that, again, the pendulum is quickly shifting, and what I encourage and sort of the takeaway for all of those stakeholders on sort of the ops, transportation, logistics team is take a step back and look at this strategically through the goals of the business as a whole, and work very, very closely with your counterparts, with the CMO, with the VP of e-commerce, with the digital marketing teams, and really understand what their objectives for shipping are. They are increasingly looking at shipping as a strategic imperative for the consumer experience. Historically, those individuals have owned the e-commerce experience, demand generation. Their job was to get the customer to the buy button. Well, guess what? They now care about what happens after the buy button. They care about that post-purchase experience, the retention of the customer, CSAT, NPS, etc. But also they're realizing that they've known for years that free shipping was probably the single biggest tool to impact conversion rates on their site. They're now realizing that shipping speed and the shipping experience, everything from the tracking, the communications, etc., that has a huge impact on influencing consumers' decision to add something to their cart and actually complete a checkout. And so they are becoming more and more vested in what shipping is, and they're not just sort of taking a passive role anymore and putting sort of free and expedited next day as the shipping options. They're wanting to have a much more strategic conversation about what shipping means for the customer experience. And so as it relates to alternative carriers, what my takeaway is, and I'd strongly encourage, is get build a really strong relationship with your digital marketing and e-commerce teams, understand what they're looking for shipping, work collaboratively on what has been said, what is a 2 to 3 year strategy for the post-purchase shipping experience, and then map that back to say, how can alternative carriers help us achieve those goals? Because, I'm a very big proponent. I think if we sit here next year and we run that same poll, I bet you that half of the people are now saying that it's all about faster delivery times. It's going to be about speed, speed, and speed. And so how do we achieve and level the playing field with Amazon?
Great. Frank?
Yeah, real quick. I think I share Vin's and Peter's sentiments for sure, but for me, my takeaway now is, for those who did implement or in the process of implementing alternate providers as a solution, stay the course. And by this, I mean, you and the carrier have made significant investment in time, effort, funds, of course, to bring alternatives into the mix. So continue to work with them, cement the relationships. If they're performing well, how can they perform better? What can they do? Hold them accountable, of course, right? It's part of the process. And if they're not performing well, as we saw, there are a multitude of options now to explore other options to say, okay, what else is out there? And I would just say, just make best use and take advantage of the alternatives provider energy, experience, technology to provide stability to your delivery ecosystem and protect yourself from future volatility.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's end our session with a couple of Q&A questions. And again, if you have a question, use your GoToWebinar tools to submit one, but we have a couple that have already been sent. And Peter, this one's for you. Could staffing problems directly or negatively affect the time frame and efficiency correlated to the delivery times expected for parcel shipping? And if so, what is the strategy around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're coming out of the the pandemic. I think one of the biggest risks around if you like, sort of reliability and capacity and the overall ecosystem across the alternatives, as well as the legacy carriers, is obviously staffing. We've heard a lot about the challenges during the pandemic of getting people to come to work. We've obviously seen carriers having to do big increases in terms of wages and so forth to attract and retain people in the workforce. And I think it is still a risk. What I would say is, though, especially if we're going into sort of a recessionary environment, that risk probably mitigates as people become less. We've seen I think everyone's sort of seeing this in the labor market, both sort of that hourly paid as well as a salaried perspective, that there is more anxiety around job security at the moment, and I think that's sort of helping offset those risks around staffing problems. And a lot of these staffing problems were actually due to the pandemic itself. With people testing positive, then not coming into work and not having sort of a cascading impact. We saw that across the board, especially perhaps not so much the last mile delivery drivers who were they're kind of working on their own. They're somewhat isolated, but certainly we saw a lot of the challenges, I'd say, in the 3PLs and e-commerce warehouses. That's where a lot of the bottlenecks were. We saw 3PLs that were typically picking and packing within a day. Sometimes now SLAs dropping to 2-3 days, and obviously that has therefore an impact on the consumer's perception of how long shipping's taken, even though perhaps it wasn't so much the fault of the carriers, it was more the fault of the warehouse operations. But again, I think all of that sort of touch wood back to normal with the pandemic now, mostly in the rearview mirror.
Good answer. Frank, I got a tough one for you. How likely do we think that UPS will not strike in 2023?
Well, Jerry, as I mentioned, if I had a crystal ball, I could answer that question. I wouldn't be here talking to all you folks. I'd be on some island somewhere, right? But I can tell you this. I mentioned in the introduction, I've been around for a little bit of time, and I actually lived the dream during the last UPS labor stoppage. And I can tell you that there were no winners. I don't know if there are others on the call that remember that time, and the anxiety and the tumultuous environment that ensued post the labor short stoppage was just a no-win situation. By this I mean certainly shippers were stuck, right? They couldn't get their goods out. UPS lost market share, lost face with their customers, if you will, not being able to address it maybe more proactively. FedEx, was in the process of acquiring Caliber RPS at the time, so just exacerbated that whole thing. It opened the door for competition, et cetera. Fast forward to today, because there are alternatives, not that we could absorb that type of volume levels by any stretch of the imagination, but again, it goes back to our true takeaway of saying, like, risk mitigation to the best of the capabilities and abilities of the alternatives. But I would say this: there's going to be some saber rattling for sure. There's going to be some anxiety around it. But I think at the end of the day, hopefully it just settles, because again, no one really won after that event, and it just caused so much market turbulence that I hope I don't see it again, because it wasn't
Yeah.
fun. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, Julian sent a really good question for all three of you. Are there any initiatives in place for you or other alternative carriers to specifically address the small shippers, the true SMB, who traditionally are tied to the big three due to volumes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to give an answer on that, and I would tell you that we actually we service a fair chunk of the mid-market, what I call kind of the mid-market type customer. I can't say honestly maybe the small customer, because it still comes down to volume at pickup, right? That sometimes is the challenge, and it's volume at pickup and proximity to the induction point within our network. But I will tell you that I think we're a really good fit for kind of that mid-market customer. We have some enterprise type customers as well, but I think I'm happy to talk. I don't know who exactly this, whoever it is, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. But I think we have found that we're a pretty good fit for that mid-market type customer. Again, depending on location of origin and whatnot. But I think every alternative carrier, if you will, has kind of their own strategy around what the ideal customer profile looks like. But I can tell you specifically for parcel, with our economy service, which is a USPS based solution, kind of more of a deferred product, and then we have our expedited, which is that zone skip model. We have found that we can be a fit for that mid-market type customer. So I think it gives access to that kind of more zone skip type solution to more mid-sized type customers than they normally would have.
I'm glad that you said that, because Chris has another good question. What level of package volume daily do you need to reach in order to leverage zone skipping into major cities or regions?
I would say specifically for us, because we're running those lane segments, we can be really flexible. A lot of it comes down to the profile of the parcels, and the way that we manage our expedited with commercial airlift, obviously, dimensional or cube type items are not really a good fit, but certainly small footprint, poly bag apparel, like Peter's service, that's a really good fit. So again, I think a lot of this comes down to, and what I'm seeing with these questions, is every shipper has, kind of their own unique need. And as such, the way that you look at alternative carriers needs to be built on what exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish. And so, yeah, that's how I would answer that question.
I think too, Jerry, that it comes down to, we all know that scale matters, and delivery, pickup density drives the course. But at the end of the day, with technology and routing capabilities and optimizations for pickup, of course, it all depends where geographically the pickups are. If they're in closer to the markets or closer to the populated shipping areas, if you will, we are making a concerted effort as well to strike an accord with the small, medium business, more medium business, to Vince's point, right? Because those are the shippers that are paying the most with these increases from the nationals, and to help and try and provide alternatives. And that's up to us, right? To go into these corridors and solicit from multitudes of shippers to, again, get density enough where it makes sense to drive the cost down and make it equitable or make it cost effective for both parties to provide the service. So it is definitely top of mind to answer the question for the carriers as well, for the alternative providers, I am sure. because we know that is a very crucial, critical element for those customer strategic initiatives, I'm sure.
Very crucial. I'm going to try to get one last question in there. This one is from Christopher. Do you expect the macroeconomic impacts like inflation, fuel, labor, energy to continue to drive up freight costs beyond 2023, or do you foresee a potential peak is reached?
I think we're at the peak. I mean, if you look at sort of inbound supply chain, the Port of LA is back to normal. All of the COVID issues in Shanghai is back to normal. The shipping spot rates are almost back down to pre-pandemic. So the cost of a retailer placing an order from the supply chain in Asia today is almost back to sort of where it was at the start of the pandemic. And so I think on the supply chain side, we certainly we're already on our way down from peak as it relates to those those costs. I think on the fuel side, obviously we've still got the conflict going on in Ukraine, and that's impacting sort of global energy prices. So those issues I think will stay with us a little bit longer. But I think from the inflation perspective, as it none of us have a crystal ball, and I don't work for the Fed, but I think we've kind of reached we're on our way back down from sort of the worst case scenario as it relates to the inflationary pressures. Now that doesn't mean, of course, that both the we've already seen it from FedEx, and there will be sort of continued price increases going into 23. But I think that's as we go through 23, and certainly as we see the GRIs next year, I don't think we'll see the stick again.
Well, thank you all. I'm so happy to have been able to do this with you. This is my first one, your first one. And if anybody had questions that we didn't answer, I apologize. Hang on to them, because Frank and Vin and Peter might be back for maybe a parcel cast. We'll see. If you need more information, please contact us at proshipinc.com or sales@proshipinc.com. And on the screen, you will see information to contact Frank, Vin, and Peter at ShipX Parcel and X Delivery. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here with me.
Thank you,
Well,
Jerry.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the attendees.
Yep. Bye now.
And all the attendees.
All the attendees. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone, have a good day.